Hey guys, Charles Yeager for Tuts Plus. Today I'm going to show you guys how to create a cool laser light animation. It's a pretty cool effect and it's pretty similar to the opening credits of the movie Tron Legacy. It's a good effect that you can use either as an accent on motion graphics or composite onto real footage. It's primarily going to be using the plugin Optical Flares from Video Copilot. If you don't have Optical Flares and you have another plugin that does similar effects, you can use that or even try to emulate this without the use of plugins. But in order to get the best effect, I'm going to recommend using Optical Flares. Let's go ahead and look at two examples of this right here. Here's one with a logo intro. Then here's another just kind of as a motion graphic. And on that second one, you'll notice it was a different color, kind of had a wiggle to it to make it look more cinematic, and also had kind of some smoke composited in the lights. We're going to be going over how to do all that too. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this tutorial. Let's get to it. All right, first thing we're going to do is create a new composition. I'm just going to make this 1920 by 1080 comp with 23.976 frame rate. I'm going to call this main. I'm going to set it at 3 seconds long, hit OK. All right, I'm going to right click and create a new solid. I'm going to call this base flare. Hit OK. And I'm going to go to the effects panel and type in Optical Flares. I'm going to drag that on the solid. All right, let's click on the options menu. And we're going to hit clear all on the base preset. I'm going to click on the lens objects here, and inside the Optical Flares UI, we're going to basically create the base, the light flare. And in order for us to do that, I'm going to need a glow, a glint, and a spike ball. And we can change the color of these here to red. I'm going to move this over till I get a little bit of white left in the center there. Hit OK. And if you want to play with the scale of any of these, you can. I think this is pretty good for us right now. I may actually bring down the glint there. And while we're at it, we'll just do the spike ball down a little bit too. Hit OK. All right, let's move this down to the very bottom center of the screen. And we're going to need to adjust a couple other parameters here. Under flicker, I'm going to set this to sharp. And I'm going to set this to 30. And for the amount, I'm going to put 50. And if we scroll through here, you can see it's kind of flickering just to give it a little bit extra element to it. It makes it look a lot better. I'm also going to adjust the rotation here. Rotation offset, I'm going to create a keyframe at the very beginning, and I'm going to come down to the very end, rotate this about 15 degrees. Now we can scroll through and see this is just kind of rotating and flickering. I'd like to add a little bit of a blur to this. I'm going to type in fast blur. Add this under the Optical Flares. I'm going to set this at about 35. I'm going to click on repeat edge pixels. All right, let's create a new solid. I'm going to call this scan lines. And we're going to add back onto that Optical Flares. And we're going to go into options here. And now we basically are trying to create the lines that kind of scan across from left to right on our main flare. I'm going to clear all this out. And we're going to use just one spike ball. I'm going to change the color of this to red again, kind of like we had. And we need to adjust some of the parameters over here under spike ball controls. Under complexity, I'm going to set this to 10. And under thickness, I'm going to set this at 30. So we basically have a spike ball with just these thin lines sticking off of it. Let's hit OK. Let's pull this down to the bottom center. I'm going to set this on screen. And I'm going to, let's see here, I'm going to increase the scale of this around 360 there. And under rotation offset, I'm going to hold Alt and click on the stopwatch there. I'm going to type in the expression time times 100. Now if I solo that layer and we scroll through here, we'll see it rotating just like that. That's exactly what we want. Now I'm going to click on the scan lines. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it, Command D on a Mac. And I'll unsolo that first one we had just so we can see the second one here. I'm going to hit U on the keyboard when I have that layer selected to bring up the keyframes. And on the time on this one, I'm going to set this to -80. So now we should have two scan lines, one going one way and one the other. Let's go ahead and do a RAM preview of this just so we can see what's going on here. And there we go. Now we kind of have this cool laser light show thing going on. All right, now we're going to create these kind of more dominant laser lines that are kind of going from the middle to the upper corners. But before we do this, I like to create kind of a mask guide for me. So I'm going to create a new solid. I'm just going to call this mask. Change the color of this just to be a different color. And we're going to delete this. You don't have to do this, but it helps me. And I'm going to click on the pen tool. Make sure you're not set on Roto Bezier. And I'm going to click right here in the center and up to the top corners, just to give me kind of a visual guide here for these lines. All right, now let's right click, create a new solid. I'm going to call this side flares. I'm going to go to the effect, Optical Flares, add that on there. Let's go to the options here. I'm going to clear all. And let's select the lens object streak. Change it to red as well. And hit OK. Set this to screen mode. All right, so now what we want to do, I'm going to go to rotation here. Set this at about 48. We want to align the center of this down here at the bottom, but make sure it's kind of aligned up with the edge of this mask here. So this is just kind of a visual guide. Once we get that, I'm going to click on the side flares, do Control-D, Command-D on a Mac to duplicate it. On the one we just created, I'm going to rotate it -48. Move it to the center. And now if we turn off our mask there, and we just solo these two, you can kind of see what we're doing here. We're creating this V, basically an upside down triangle. That's exactly what we want. So now we can take that mask and delete it. Like I said, it just served as a visual guide. And now I'm going to click on the top side flare there. I'm going to duplicate that one more time with Control-D. I'm going to rename this top flare. Remove any rotation on that one to 0. I'm going to drag it all the way to the top here, right at the top edge. All right, now let's do a RAM preview and kind of see what we got here. All right, that's looking good. That's exactly what we want. We want this, basically kind of this defined triangle here, because that's the only area we're actually going to be seeing. And these lines out here to the edge we will not see. So let's move on to the next step. You're going to want to select all of your layers, click on the top one, hold Shift, and click on the bottom one, and go to Layer, Pre-Compose, which is just off the screen here. We're going to call this Flare Base, and click OK. Now what we need to do is animate the flare coming on. So I'm going to say this is going to take about 3 or 4 keyframes to come on here. So I'm going to push the page down key, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to select the pen tool, make sure Roto Bezier is off. I'm going to click right here in the center, then up here in the top right corner, left corner, and back down to the center. You can adjust this if you need to. Looks good to me. Now I'm going to select the flare base, hit M to bring up the mask path. I'm going to create a keyframe right there, 4 frames in. Then I'm going to drag this down to the very beginning, and I'm going to turn on the rulers, and I'm going to pull this out here. Just click here and drag to pull out a guide layer. I'm going to put this right in the center. This is going to help us when we move this into the center. So now click inside of your mask, and now pull the left side all the way, and you'll see it snaps right there to that guide, which is exactly what we want. And do that for the other one. Now we can turn off the rulers and the guides. And there we go. Now we can see this kind of animates on, which is exactly like the laser light coming on. The edge is a little bit sharp there when it comes on, so we can turn on motion blur here and motion blur for the preview. And you can see it's a lot softer on the edges there. It stays sharper at the end. But that's what we want. It's going to look a lot better in the animation. Let's go ahead and do a RAM preview. And there you go. It comes on really quickly, but that's what we want. We don't need to animate it going out at the end, because when it ends, it's going to be facing directly toward the camera, and it will kind of disappear on its own. You'll see how that happens coming up. All right, I'm going to click on the flare base here, and we're going to pre-compose this again. Go to Layer, Pre-Compose, and make sure you click on Move All Attributes into a new composition. We're going to call this Flare Laser. And hit OK. All right, so now what we're going to want to do is make this 3D and kind of animate this on a 3D axis. So the first thing we need to do is click on our flare laser and click on the pan behind tool up here, and you'll see that crosshairs right there in the center. We need to click that. I'm going to hold Shift when I click and drag that right down here to the very bottom center. And then I'm going to turn on the title action save so I can see the center crosshairs here. I'm going to click and drag again, holding shift, the entire layer so that point's right in the center. All right, now I'm going to turn that back off. Now for our flare laser, I'm going to turn on motion blur and I'm going to turn on 3D, so it's a 3D layer now. Now if I push R on the keyboard, it's going to bring up the rotation. If we change the X rotation here, you can kind of see how this looks like it's now pointing towards the camera in 3D space. And so basically now you can kind of get the drift of what we're going to be doing. So let's go ahead and keyframe the movement animation of this laser. I'm going to have it start off facing down, create a keyframe there. I'm going to move out about 10 frames. I'm going to hold shift and push page down and move down 10 keyframes. I'm going to rotate this pointing up. Go down a little bit further. Bring it back down. Up again, and we'll have it end right here in the center, right at 90 degrees. All right, and since that's where we want it to end, I'm going to click over here and drag the ending of this to stop right there on the last keyframe. Even though it's facing right toward the camera and we don't see it, it still could show up a little bit there on our final render, and it could add a little glitch to it. So I'm going to pull that down to end right there. And turning on motion blur here, let's go ahead and do a RAM preview of this. And there we go, you can kind of see the movement of the flare there coming on. I'm going to adjust this a little bit more when this goes back up at the top. I'm going to have this go a little bit higher. And something else we can do to make this look a little bit better, I'm going to highlight all of these keyframes and I'm going to control click to make them round. It's going to turn them into roaming keyframes. Just going to make the movement a little bit smoother. RAM preview again. All right, I'm pretty satisfied with that. All right, so now what we're going to want to do is duplicate this laser layer. So we have both of our lasers animating here. So I'm going to click on that. Control D to duplicate it. And hit U here to bring up the keyframes. And I'm actually going to have this second laser come on a little bit later than the first, kind of halfway in between there. I'm going to go ahead and delete these keyframes because we're going to do some new ones here. And I'm going to have it start off facing upwards. Let's move down here. Have it kind of animate down. And just have it animate back up and end right there in the middle. Drag this down for the ending. Highlight all these keyframes, control click to make them roaming. And now let's do a RAM preview of both the lasers here. And there we go. That looks pretty cool. Kind of comes on, scans everything on the screen, and then goes away. All right, so that's the gist of it, creating the laser light, but we can do some other things to kind of accent that and make it look a lot more realistic. First thing we can do is composite that onto some real footage. So I've got some footage here, put this at the bottom, and I'll solo this. This is just me with a flashlight with a red gel on it, shining it through a doorway. And when you shine it through something, it kind of accents a little bit better. You can see like the doorway kind of illuminates around the edges. And that's going to help it look more realistic with a composite. So unsolo that. We're going to want to set our laser lights on screen mode. May have to reposition some things in order to get it right in the center. And I'm going to move the laser lights down up here right when the flashlight kind of comes on, so right about there. So I'm going to select both of them, move them down. And let's RAM preview this. And there you go, now you kind of see what that looks like composited on the real footage. Adds kind of a cool dynamic to it. But I'm going to show you guys some other ways to do this just with the motion graphic standpoint. So I'm going to delete that footage that I brought in. And what I'm going to do here is actually create a flare that kind of goes right in the back center of this laser light. So I'm going to right click, new solid. I'm going to name this center flare. Hit OK. Go to the effect, Optical Flares, put that on it. All right, I'm going to click on options. I'm going to clear all. I'm going to add in a streak, a glow, and maybe a spike ball there. I'm going to make the spike ball quite a bit smaller there. Change the global color to red again. Hit OK. Move that right to the center there. Move this to the bottom. All right, now we need to animate it kind of coming on. So I'm going to set a keyframe for the brightness. Hit U here. 0 to start. Go out here. This is right where the laser lights kind of come on, so we'll have it kick up pretty big. Come down here, have this kind of go down to about 50, and we'll have it flare up real big right here at the end again. And set it back to 0. We can do a couple other tricks to kind of help accent this, give it a little more movement under flicker. I'm going to set this at around 20 and 20. Change that to sharp. And for the scale, I'm going to alt-click, add an expression wiggle. So about 2 times per second, it changes about 50 pixels. And now if we turn on motion blur, let's do a RAM preview of this. So there we go, we have the flare come on and then flare out at the end. All right, so that looks pretty good. We can do a couple other things to accent even more. I'm gonna create a new solid, call this dirt. I'm gonna add optical flares onto that layer and go into options there. I'm gonna clear everything out. And under lens texture, I'm gonna select DAG. It's gonna kind of give us this lens texture, and we're just gonna hit OK. And this is pretty cool. This will kind of emulate a lens, like the light shining into the lens and there's specks on the lens. The thing about this with optical flares though is the lens textures don't actually react to the color here. So if I go to color mode here, it's not gonna change this. So an easy way to fix this, go to Effect, Color Correction, Hue and Saturation. And we can click on Colorize here. That's gonna change it to a red, but we wanna make it a little bit brighter red. So we'll go to this color saturation right here, pull this up around 75 or so. And now you can see that matches our laser light a lot better. I'm gonna set the mode here to screen. And so now we can see that kind of on top of the footage there, but we don't want this to be on all the time. We're gonna have to keyframe this like we did our other light. So what we can do, under brightness here, I'm gonna set this at 0 to start, a keyframe. I'm gonna hit U to bring this up down here. And let's go down, and we're gonna have this appear. I'm gonna do another keyframe here at 0. Have this kind of come on just slightly, about 80 right there. Then get really bright right here. Kind of pull it down, just vary it kind of with the way your light shines at the screen. We'll have it flare back up big at the end and then go out. Maybe a little bit prominent, so I'm gonna hit T on the dirt layer, bring that opacity down to about 50%, and you can tweak that kind of as you go along. And something else you can do is just to create an adjustment layer, add the effect, color correction curves, and just kind of pull the contrast down a little bit. It's gonna make the colors kind of pop a little bit more, darken the blacks, make it look a little bit more cinematic. I'm gonna actually turn off the dirt layer there. On the adjustment layer, also, if you want to change the color of your flare really easily now, you can just add the effect, again, hue and saturation. Click on colorize, and we can just rotate the color hue here and change this to kind of a teal blue. Bring up the saturation. So that's an easy way to change the color of your flare lights. And now if you want to add the wiggle effect to it, this is also easy to do. Go ahead and select all of your layers. Go to Layer, Pre-Compose. We're gonna call this Laser Animation. Hit OK. Now we need to create a new null object. We're gonna call this Controller. We need to add the effect, Expression Controls, Slider Control. We need to do that twice, actually. Let's call this top one per second. And we'll call this second one pixels. All right, and this is gonna serve as our wiggle controller for our wiggle expression. So I'm gonna click on the laser animation layer. I'm gonna come down here on the timeline right where the flare kind of comes on. And I'm gonna push P on the keyboard for position. I'm gonna alt click. I'm gonna type in wiggle. I'm just gonna type in 2 random numbers. I'm gonna do 5 and 5, just to make it easy. And then I'm gonna click on the controller layer. Click back down here on wiggle. I'm going to highlight the first value, drag the pick whip up here to per second slider. Then I'll click on the second value, 5 there. Also do the pick whip up to pixel slider. And now we can keyframe our expression. So I'm going to have both of these start out at 0. Hit U on the keyboard to show those. And I'll pull this up here. So right when the laser lights kind of start coming on, I'm going to keyframe again at 0. Then let's move down here. I'm going to set the first slider at 2. So twice per second. I'm going to have this move 25 pixels. And we can move down here a little bit and kind of vary this. Change this to 0. And we'll have it wiggle again right here before the very end. I change this to 50. All right, if we scroll through here, you can kind of see that the footage is kind of wiggling off the composition there. It's giving us this black bars. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to click on the laser animation, hit S, and scale this up a little bit. It's not going to really distort the quality that much because I'm going to have motion blur on for that layer, and it's going to be so quick that it's really not going to be that much of a visual change. All right, I'm going to turn on motion blur here, and let's go ahead and do a RAM preview of this. All right, so there you can see we have the flare light come on, wiggles violently, and then goes away. It definitely adds that extra something to this, makes it look a lot more cinematic and a lot better. But another trick we can do is kind of add some smoke that only appears when the laser lights kind of pass through it. And in order to do that, we're actually going to have to pre-compose everything one more time. So let's select everything here, go to Layer, Pre-Compose, call that Laser with Wiggle. Now I'm going to bring in some footage, an atmosphere. It's from the Video Copilot Action Essentials Pack. If you have any other smoke footage, that'll work fine too. I'm going to scale this up. I'm going to change the transfer mode here to screen. And I'm going to click on the laser wiggle layer there. I'm going to hit Control D or Command D on a Mac, and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to move one above the atmosphere there. And on the atmosphere layer, I'm going to set this to Track Matte, Luma Matte. I'm going to turn off this bottom layer just so we can see what's happening here. So now we can see that the smoke's only appearing kind of where the laser is going through. It may be hard to see with the compression of this video. We can select our atmosphere layer and go to Effect, Color Correction Curves. And we can play with the RGB, boost that a little bit, and also boost the alpha. That's really going to make it appear there. And now if we turn on this bottom layer and kind of scroll through here, you can see the smoke kind of appearing where the laser light is hitting. This is really bright, so it's kind of hard to see, and I'm sure it'll be difficult to see with the compression of this tutorial, but just kind of tweak the curve settings here on your atmosphere. What you may have to do may be a lot different than what I'm doing here, but let's go ahead and do a RAM preview of this. And there you go. Like I said, it may be difficult to see, and it's very subtle, but the smoke definitely adds a little bit more atmosphere to this shot, makes it definitely look a lot more realistic. And if you're getting a lot of color banding on your animation, you may want to change this to, if you hold Alt and click right here, change that to 16 bits per channel or even 32 bits per channel. Looks like 16 bits is going to be okay. And a warning, if you go to 32 bits per channel, it may really change the look of everything just because of the colors. But you can kind of see we're going to get a cool brighter blue along the edge here. So I'm going to stick with 16 bits per channel. All right, guys, that's all I got for you for the laser light animation tutorial. Hopefully you picked up a couple tips and tricks, and this is Charles Yeager for Tuts Plus.